portion is about the Solvay process. It's been used since the 1860s in the manufacture of sodium carbonate. Sodium carbonate is Na2CO3. If you see NaHCO3, that's sodium bicarbonate. So here we have sodium carbonate. And it's a white powder. It has certain uses, mainly in manufacturing of glass. Glass making uses a mixture of sodium carbonate and calcium carbonate and silicon dioxide. And it's used for windows, clear glass and bottled glass. It's also used as a water softening agent because the CO3 from the Na2CO3 can precipitate our magnesium and calcium ions from hard water. Remember, my good car. And those will precipitate out as MgCO3 or CaCO3, calcium carbonate. So it prevents them from making that precipitate with the soap, giving that white scum when you use soap. So sodium carbonate is often called washing soda. It has other uses in paper making. It's used to produce sodium hydrogen sulfite, which is used in a method called the sulfite method to separate two polymers, lignin and cellulose. We don't go into detail about that, but it's another use for sodium carbonate. Sodium hydroxide can be produced for soaps, to make soaps and detergents. It's reacted with calcium hydroxide, which is slaked lime. It's calcium carbonate heated to form calcium oxide, then added to water, and it forms calcium hydroxide suspension. You can see the sodium and the hydroxide would be in solution. The calcium and the carbonate would form a precipitate and come out of solution and form a solid, and leaving you with sodium hydroxide. Just another method of producing sodium hydroxide. Okay, the raw materials necessary for the Solvay process are salt or brine solution, calcium carbonate, limestone, needed in vast quantities. They use quarries to dig it out of the ground. It was in the form of ancient limestone, formed from reefs, shells, and that sort of thing. Tropical reefs, sorry. Corals and calcium carbonate organisms. Also ammonia is used, and that can come from the Haber process, another vital process. The reaction of sodium chloride, so this is the overall reaction to produce the sodium carbonate, and it reacts with calcium carbonate. Sodium chloride and calcium carbonate don't really react spontaneously, so they're not going to form into those products, sodium carbonate and calcium chloride. So the overall effect of this, the equilibrium is way over on the left. So you mainly have your reactants, not much of the product is formed. And so you need to carry out this reaction in a series of different steps, which will then proceed and end up at the sodium carbonate, this one, and the calcium chloride. Okay. So the steps. Now this next diagram looks quite difficult, but there's steps involved in this. We start off, and you can see here we have one of our raw materials. We have another over here, calcium carbonate, and we have ammonia coming in from our Haber process. Firstly, we need brine, and that's purified. Make sure it's quite concentrated and it has no impurities in it. once again, impurities, the enemy of this process. Similar to the Haber process, you can't have any impurities because they affect the ion catalyst. We also have this saturated brine solution is then put in to an ammonia absorber. So we're adding ammonia to it here, and the brine solution comes down. They're mixed together, and this is in an ammoniating tower. Carbon dioxide is produced down here in a furnace or a kiln. It's another word for a furnace. And you get this calcium oxide produced. And that, when it enters and adds water, it's called a slaker, a lime slaker. Now, so we have our sodium chloride, we have our ammonia, and now we also have our calcium carbonate being changed to, in the slaker, calcium hydroxide, and it's being added. Now, when the calcium oxide was formed and sent along that path to form calcium hydroxide, here we had a lot of carbon dioxide produced. It's from the decomposition of calcium carbonate into calcium oxide. You're left over with carbon dioxide. It's put into a Solvay tower, and it's combined with your ammonia and your sodium chloride. So you've got these three things being added together. You from that get produced, and that's bubbling CO2 all the time through the system. At the lower levels, these two salts, sodium hydrogen carbonate or sodium bicarbonate, is produced, and it's cooled in the lower parts of the tower to form a precipitate. The other side, the ammonium chloride, does not precipitate. So these two are then filtered, and one goes off to be heated and has the ammonia NH3 removed here, leaving calcium chloride, and your extra ammonia goes back into the process and starts again. It's added to the brine solution. The other part of this, the sodium bicarbonate, is heated, and you can see here it's being heated. That produces water, our product that we want, sodium carbonate, but also carbon dioxide, which can then be captured and bubbled through the tower again, a carbonation tower, or our Solvay tower. So once again, quickly go through this and you'll see it on another diagram just following. These are the equations, by the way, and you'll see those again later. And here's this one here, the heating and decomposition of sodium bicarbonate into sodium carbonate, and CO2, which is recaptured, and H2O, which is then recaptured or kept for later use for cooling, etc. Here's one diagram that was in a past HSC where people had to identify X as part of this solution. We have our carbon dioxide, our brine, our ammonia going into the tower. These two are combined earlier to form a brine ammonia solution, a mixture, sorry. Then carbonate dioxide is bubbled through. You get the two formations, sodium bicarbonate, that's NaHCO3, and ammonium chloride. These are separated by filtration, and as the mixture is cooled, this one here becomes less soluble than this one, and it becomes filterable through a vacuum filtration system. It's then heated to produce carbon dioxide, water, which isn't on this diagram, and our sodium carbonate, our the whole aim of the Solvay process. The other one, ammonium chloride, has some useful parts in it, so it's it's sent through our heating system, and it is formed into calcium chloride and ammonia. So it's decomposed. The ammonia is then reused back up here, and then part of this we have is calcium oxide, from our limestone is being entered in here to help this form ammonium chloride. This is a mind map model of what the same process is. You can see we have heat, calcium carbonate, and it's being split up into these. CO2 gets used in this process. We've got our brine, we've got our ammonia. They go down through the tower to produce these two. Now once those two are produced, one of them can be heated and converted with our calcium into calcium chloride with a lot of ammonia left over. That ammonia here is then sent back and reused in the system. The other part of that, sodium hydrogen carbonate or sodium bicarbonate, can be heated and decomposed into sodium carbonate and water and CO2. This is the step done in the lab where we heat this in a sidearm test tube, and you'll see that in a later slide, producing carbon dioxide, which can be tested for using lime water, and it'll turn milky. This one looks a little bit harder to follow, but it's actually a little bit easier with the. Here we have another from online, and you can see we've got our raw materials entering. This one's heated, producing CO2 and CaO, which is then added to water, slaked water. You get calcium hydroxide formed. Along here we've got our Solvay process happening here with our CO2 and our ammonia and our brine, and it's producing these two products. One is filtered off, so it becomes solid. One is not solid, it goes down and is heated. These two here, ammonium chloride and calcium hydroxide, combine to produce calcium chloride and our ammonia gas. The ammonia gas is reused back into the system, combined with more of this brine solution. The CO2 is also reused here, back into the system, and here, back into the system. So you're getting this system reusing a lot of the CO2. The main products here you'll see later being produced. We have a lot of heat from all these exothermic processes. We also have calcium chloride produced, which can be a problem for the environment, but we'll see more of that coming up shortly. So in that Solvay tower, we have a tower fitted with baffle plates, and the carbon dioxide is bubbled through the sodium chloride and ammonia solution, mixture, and that forms a precipitate of hydrogen carbonate back at the bottom of the tower as it cools, leaving the ammonium chloride over. The CO2 reacts with those, and you can see these equations are balanced. So this is in our carbonating tower. Our ammonia reacts with the CO2 to produce, and some water to produce this intermediate stage, ammonium carbonate. The ammonium carbonate then reacts with more CO2 in the tower to produce our ammonium hydrogen carbonate, or ammonium bicarbonate. The bicarbonate is then reacted with the sodium chloride to produce sodium bicarbonate, which is NaHCO3. and our sodium ammonium chloride. This one's soluble, this one less soluble at cooler temperatures, so cooling has to take place here. And here's our final part of the reaction, producing these two species. This one can be filtered. Just pointing out a couple of things. So that's our filtration of these two, can be separated. This one's aqueous and this one becomes solid at cooler temperatures. All of these reactions, above reactions, are highly exothermic, so they're producing a lot of heat. So to counter this effect, because that would drive the reactions backwards or dissolve our sodium hydrogen carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, we need to cool that down. So a lot of water is needed to cool this system, and then filtration can occur to separate these two. And that's the overall reaction from that last step. Here's another diagram of the whole process, and you can see the towers here. Emanation tower, Solvay tower, and here's our ammonia recovery tower, just for heating this with calcium hydroxide in order to separate our calcium chloride and release our ammonia to go back into the process. A kiln is just another word for the heating section, for heating our calcium carbonate. So the Solvay process has a lot of problems associated with it. Some of those, and most of them, are environmental issues, and they have to be dealt with in order to make this process available in many different countries. First of them is limestone is needed as a raw material, and that requires quarrying, so removing top layer of the soil on limestone rich areas and then digging down, blasting, removing limestone from the ground, and it can be quite an eyesore. It can also involve some issues with releasing minerals and other substances into the surrounding environment. This particular example here is an open cut mine or quarry. Water in it would need to be treated, not just released out into the rivers, because it's this high mineral load. A lot of calcium carbonate, limestone around. It has to be near transport roads. Cars and trucks need to be able to get in, cranes, to quarry and to remove the limestone to take to the Solvay plant. You also have your discharges from the plant, which include calcium chloride water that's been used to cool systems down. And you can see there in inland areas this would be quite a problem with fresh water for triggering issues like turbidity and eutrophication. We'll have a look at those a little bit later. In the ocean, it's easier to put some of the discharges into the ocean because of its large heat capacity, but also because you're not going to upset the balance of the ions present by putting calcium chloride into the water. You might get some precipitation of calcium chloride. We'll see that a little bit later. The Solvay plant takes up a lot of area. You can see here quite a large area. You've got towers, cooling, transport links, roads. In this case there's a river nearby, but it might not be able to use that. And the large area can cause problems when it's in areas near the coast where land is at a premium, or it's hard to get hold of enough land for these sort of things. Railway lines, railway cars, and you can see a lot of infrastructure surrounding these plants. Okay, there's another one. You can see the train lines. You've got storage tanks, a lot of them. It's some more people living nearby, which have to be consideration. You've got towers and a lot of storage, electricity in other towers, road infrastructure, rail infrastructure. You've got water. It needs to be contained if it's hot or needs to be cooled. So we've got a bunch of environmental issues, and they include the waste CO2. It's a byproduct of this process. Our NH3 and CO2, if they're released or if they leak or if there's issues producing these, it can cause problems. Thermal pollution, you've got a lot of heat being produced from the exothermic reactions. Limestone quarrying needs limestone. It also needs the quarrying, which takes up land and can have a lot of environmental issues associated with it. You also need hubs for transporting, and so you need the limestone nearby the plant in order for this. You've got the waste from heating the limestone to produce your calcium oxide. That waste has to be put somewhere. It can't be just dumped. It's left over from that process. Calcium chloride often can be put in the ocean, and it won't have a total effect on the balance of ions there. You might get the precipitation I was talking about before, but it's not a large problem in the ocean. Locally it could be an issue, increasing the load, salinity levels in that local area. Not sodium salts, but calcium salts. If it's dumped in inland lakes, the calcium ions can cause this hardening of the water, and the Cl can act like a bleach. You've got the chlorine ions, and they can kill organisms in the water, and that can affect the whole food chain, and as we see, lead to things like eutrophication as those organisms are broken down. But bacterial can be affected too. They often can be dumped in deep pits as the solid sodium chloride, but that could leach out into the water table, which is the water underneath the ground, and travel through that and cause salinity problems when it comes up. The calcium chloride comes up through the soil profile, can affect trees and plants and things. The ammonia and the carbon dioxide tend to be recycled. They can be recycled, they are, and that needs to be monitored a lot. You've got your ammonia lost to the atmosphere. If it does get out, it can be very hazardous, it's very toxic. It causes massive problems for people, respiratory problems. Carbon dioxide, if it is allowed to get out, or allowed to be discharged in the atmosphere, can contribute to global warming. It's a greenhouse gas. With good design and careful monitoring, the ammonia and carbon dioxide that gets into the air can be minimized, so it's not allowed to escape. So that can be mitigated, or a problem that doesn't really necessarily have to happen. The extra heat produced by these processes, because a lot of them are exothermic reactions, that heat has to be put somewhere. It can't just be radiated into the atmosphere. And the best thing to get rid of heat from objects is water, and that's what they tend to use. So waters from rivers and lakes tend to be used to cool that water down, because water has a high specific heat and energy. It can absorb a lot of heat, but that water then can't be put back into the rivers or into local ecosystems, because the heat will kill organisms. It can cause the oxygen in those areas to be reduced, because the oxygen comes out as a gas. Can't be held into the water, so it becomes less soluble. So you lose You get that eutrophication, that lack of biologically available water, oxygen. To minimise this problem of thermal pollution, often water is cooled in heat diffusers, where you put a cold pipe near a warm pipe, transfer heat from one place into another to disperse the heat, spread it out as much as possible. That's keeping some of the heat out, and then that water could be reduced or returned to the environment. However, they're expensive. It costs a lot of money to do that. If the water cooling is released, that the cooling water is released into the ocean, there's not as much problem because the heat gets dispersed quite quickly. In lakes and inland rivers and things, it would be disastrous because it would heat up the whole area. Okay, so if you had to locate a Solvay plant, Solvay process, where the Solvay process occurs, you're going to have to take into account a lot of things, and this has been the example for questions in the past HSC. You need those available raw materials, your ammonia from the harbour process, your saline solution, your brine, sodium chloride, and your CO2, which comes from the calcium carbonate and limestone in those areas. You need to get those to your plant. They need to be available, so you've got a lot of raw materials and the costs are associated with that. The plants take up a lot of land. The quarry takes up land. The plants take up land. Cooling of water takes up land. You've got infrastructure needed to transport, so expense and cost. You need a water supply. A lot of the preference would be near the coast, where you've got a lot of water available and you can remove your calcium chloride waste. You need energy, a lot of energy for pumping, cleaning, heating, cooling. A lot of this energy is needed, so you need to be a place that's got competitive energy prices. You're not going to spend all your money on energy and not be able to produce anything. You need nearby markets to send this stuff to. You need transport. You need a workforce to do the work, the monitoring of these processes. You need nearby sites to get rid of your waste. If you're inland, you need to be able to bury your calcium chloride. But you need water, so there's a sort of a toss-up between being near water, being near places where you could bury it. You need transport, train links, railways, road links. You need to be able to control your discharges of carbon dioxide and hopefully not ammonia, but water, your heating water, cooling water, sorry. So it would be best to locate your plants near the coast when considering this heat disposal and calcium chloride issues. Okay, a step that's involved in this Solvay process is one that we can do in the laboratory, and we can talk about that. But the quick one is to heat sodium hydrogen carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, to produce the sodium carbonate. So if we go back just briefly to our Solvay process, this last step, where we're heating sodium bicarbonate to produce carbon dioxide, water, and our sodium carbonate, the X there. Again here, this part here where we're heating our, here it is, sodium carbonate is heated to produce our sodium bicarbonate is heated to produce sodium carbonate, producing water and CO2. That's the one we want, and that's the one we can do in the laboratory. So how we do that is seen, and we have to be careful doing this because there are some issues about it, doing it. So the hydrogen carbonate from the reaction is produced as it decomposed, and it forms sodium carbonate, and you get CO2 produced and H2O vapor. Now this is going to be a solid, and our CO2 is going to be produced as a gas, so the best way we can do that is clamp the test tube away from the heat source. We're going to use sodium hydrogen carbonate here. It's going to be decomposed using heat. Now we have to be very careful, because when we heat and we bubble the resulting gas, which we know is carbon dioxide, through lime water, it should turn cloudy if it's carbon dioxide, because you're going to get calcium carbonate formed from your lime water, which is calcium hydroxide solution. The problem here, when you stop heating, the gases here will go back into a liquid form or a solid form if they're going all the way back, but you're going to create a vacuum here. So any water will come up and be sucked in. As it hits the hot test tube, it can cause cracking and possibly glass and explosion. So we need to be careful. We're getting pressure produced here too, so we need to take care of those sort of things. Our procedure, we set it up, heat the hydrogen carbonate with the Bunsen burner, and these are our risk factors. The glass tube should be taken out of the lime water before the Bunsen's removed. If you take it out straight away, you get that vacuum created and it'll suck back into the test tube, causing cracking, breakage. Care needs to be taken when you're heating a solid in a test tube, wearing safety glasses in case the test tube, the sidearm test tube gets blocked somehow and pressure builds up. You need to be careful when using lime water. It is calcium hydroxide solution, so it's going to affect your skin. If it gets into your eyes, it could burn you, cause issues. Okay, it should go milky if it's carbon dioxide produced. We know that's the case. And we should get that white precipitate, which is calcium carbonate. You're also getting water produced. Okay, so we can solve some problems, and we're going to look at those to analyze the relative quantities of reactants and products in each step. So the way we're doing that is looking at questions things like the volume of CO2 will be produced from a given amount of sodium hydrogen carbonate. So you need to be able to balance that equation. In the previous case here, oops, I'll just get back to this equation here. So if we've given a known amount of this, you're going to have a known number of moles, and you'll be able to work out how many moles you've got. 2 of this produces 1 of this. You can figure out how many moles of CO2 will be produced once you know the moles of NaHCO3, and you'll be able to work out how many moles of CO2 produced. It's a gas, so CO2 at room temperature, if that's the case. We'll be able to work out the volume, and that's a common sort of question, working out the volume. Don't forget, balance the equation. You may be able to get some clues if you're not sure of your equations from the exam, but just have a think about, you're going to get CO2 produced in H2O. So because it's an industrial process, you could be given large amounts, not just a few grams or 1 gram. So you're going to have to divide by the molecular weight. So think about what you're doing there and changing your grams to find the number of moles, dividing by the molecular weight of that. And there's some examples. 1,000 kilos is a ton, 1,000 grams is a kilo, a ton is 1 million grams. Okay, and that concludes that part.